It's fantastic to be kicking off this Web Summit for IASA. I'm really privileged and honoured to be on the first on the lineup. One of the reasons I'm really excited is that IASA and ourselves, who are talk about the Architect Tomorrow initiative and so on later on, but I'm really excited because the two organisations align really nicely, and so I'm really pleased that we are working together. And the material I have here, the evolution of business as usual and architecture to support that evolution of business as usual, very much aligns with the wider talks I think you're going to hear later on in this Web Summit. And there's some really impressive speakers lined up later on talking of various topics that talk about the future of digital business and innovation and technology leadership. So look, what is my talk all about? My talk really, as I say, is all about the fact that the business as usual sort of phrase is now a very difficult thing to pin down, and it keeps moving and changing and shifting. And that was true before the current pandemic, with technology disruption, digital disruption, and new technologies and new approaches to business and how organizations operate. The world has kind of seen a catalyzed move towards adopting working from home, shifts to digital, shifts to e-commerce, shifts to other aspects of working remotely. And the other thing is that the pandemic has forced a lot of people to recognize and reconnect with the natural society, the natural world around them, that perhaps the modern society often lets us forget. But actually it's kind of been painfully brought back home to us that we are biological, living, breathing things, and we need to operate in the ecosystem, the natural ecosystem, and we need to think about sustainability, and we need to think about how we rebuild post-pandemic in a sustainable sense, both in the business sustainability, financial stability sense, but also in a natural ecosystem sense. And so businesses will not operate or be successful in the medium to longer term without considering these things and how they operate and how they pivot and how they change. And architects are, of course, at the center of all this. Architects are often turned to provide answers and provide solutions and designs and enterprise architectures that will help organizations respond to these challenging times. And how do they reorganize themselves, re-establish themselves, and perhaps reinvent parts of themselves to be more relevant and to be more successful in the future, is very much sitting with the architects. And so Architect Tomorrow is very much about a community that we've been building to address that, to kind of bring architects globally together who've got different perspectives, either from different industries, different business perspectives, different technical disciplines, to come together and discuss many of these challenging themes. I'll talk a bit more about that later on. So in summary, my talk is going to explore this evolution of business as usual, the impact on architectural thinking, and also touch on how we at Tanium and how our Architect Tomorrow initiative helps support this new world we're in. And so now I'm going to play a short little intro video. And so yeah, this is the Architect Tomorrow initiative logo. Anyway, before we get into that, let me talk a little bit about who I am. So who is Oliver, who's talking to you? So I've been an architect, and before that, a systems developer. I started off in computer science, so a classic computer science background, but have progressed through the ranks of developer and solutions architect, enterprise architect, and more recently a couple of chief architect roles. So currently I'm the chief IT architect for the European region at Tanium. Tanium are our unified endpoint management and endpoint security solution and platform that I will touch on briefly later on in the talk. Prior to Tanium, it was just getting on for a year ago now. Prior to that, for 3 years, I was the chief architect for the risk advisory part of Deloitte in the UK. And my role at Tanium is to provide executive engagement, provide architecture engagement, provide advice, do architecture evangelization, and also come up with our reference architecture and maintain our reference architecture, as well as running the Architect Tomorrow community. And as I say, my experience spans development, hands-on development roles, DevOps, but also a range of different industries across energy, government, telco, banking, financial services, and professional services. I'm also a BCS member, chartered professional, slightly certified in AWS, and you can find me hanging out on LinkedIn quite a bit. Some of the pictures here on screen, the one that's an avatar. Recently, I was in a series at Tanium, the expert series, and in fact, the blog that inspired this talk, The Evolution of Business as Usual, is available. If you Google The Evolution of Business as Usual, you'll find that blog with my avatar associated with it, which is why I put that on there. So the evolution of business as usual then. I'm sure you would have heard similar things to this, but I just wanted to kind of capture some anecdotes from some different perspectives. One of which is, the rapid increase in speed of adopting technology to respond to the situation we're in. Out of forced necessity to continue to operate, many organizations have adopted technology that perhaps would have previously taken them years in a space of weeks. you know, I have seen firsthand myself this in our customers, and also, you know, I've heard stories from my contacts about how rapidly people have moved to, you know, remote working. People who thought perhaps they could never work remotely before are now working remotely and seeing the benefits of it. And so from a technology standpoint, it's been a rapid adoption of technology, which has come with challenges. And many have said, why couldn't we work like this before? Why didn't we realize we could work like this before? And there's been a big shift in sort of business culture, in management style, in how people are kind of trusted, how people work, how people operate, and people have had to get creative. You know, how do we do our work remotely when we're not, you know, face to face with each other? How do we continue to operate? And it's really sort of shaken up the business culture, and I think it will continue to do so in the medium term. And the last one's one I like. This is actually my neighbor that said to me, I don't miss my 2-hour each way commute, and I'm not going back to it. And by that she meant, you know, even after things return to normal, whatever that looks like post what's going on right now, she doesn't want to do the 5-day-a-week, 2-hour each way commute. You know, perhaps she'll do it two days a week, 1 or 2 days a week, but she's certainly pretty clear that she's demonstrated to her organization that she can operate successfully, she can be productive, she can do her job, and not go into the office every day. So this isn't going to be just a, you know, a slight blip and everyone goes back to the office. Of course, people will return to the office. You know, it's a good place for collaboration. You know, it's a great place for kind of working together and bouncing ideas off each other. But it's certainly not going to be the only operating model. Like I think for many organisations it was. Everyone went into the office, and we'll touch on that a little bit more in a minute. So before we go too deep into where we are now, I wanted to take a look back and hence the evolution of business as usual, because, you know, human society is pretty complicated. And if you do a bit of reading into anthropology, which I have done a little bit, it's quite fascinating to see kind of how we evolved as a society, you know, as societies, and of course then how workplaces have evolved out of those societies. So of course things started in you know, the tribal you know, era, where everyone was very, you know, perhaps independent small groups, but you know, highly agile, able to get things done with a fair degree of freedom. You know, and as things have moved on, you know, we've moved to discovering farming, discovering that, you know, we could kind of keep our food and various other things close to us. We don't have to go hunting for it. And then we of course moved into factories, and things were then kind of automated and productionized, you know, through the use of the industrial sort of era, industrialization. So various, you know, machines were deployed, advent of steam and various other things allowed us to do things that we couldn't do with just human hands. And so that kind of efficiency increased, productivity increased. And then as we've moved into, you know, the work force has moved into offices, sorry, post sort of factories, into the sort of knowledge worker kind of world. We've taken a lot of those legacy approaches from the factory into the office. You know, the kind of concept of going somewhere harks back to that. I mean, Dave Coplin does some great talks around business reimagined and the rise of the humans. And I like what he says about the fact that, you know, if you look at a lot of our technology and a lot of our things, they still hark back to the industrial era, and they still hark back to the days when typewriters were manual. For example, if you look at your QWERTY keyboard, the reason it's laid out the way it is because you know, it was designed so that the letters wouldn't clash when you typed. So, and also, if you think about going into the office, that is very much a thing where it was a necessity when perhaps we only had a mainframe computer, and it's now a thing which isn't always the right answer, as the decentralizing nature of the internet, you know, means that we can think differently about how we work, where we work, and how we get things done. And so you think about the kind of tools that have allowed us to kind of make that happen. You know, each of these sort of phases have happened because we've introduced technology at various different points. You know, so we have you know, discovered tools which allowed us to, you know, to go and hunt, and then we discovered farming, as I touched on earlier, which allowed us to free up time and allowed us to expand our knowledge, because we freed up time from doing, you know, basic necessities like staying alive, you know, looking for food and keeping warm. You know, buildings and farms allowed us to do a lot of that. And then, you know, what then moved us on from that period was, you know, clearly various discoveries, you know, Iron Age and various other things, but industrialization, you know, kind of being the next big one I've kind of highlighted. And then I suppose, you know, the move into offices was early computing. I mean, before that, paper-based files, but, you know, you then have mainframes, which is perhaps the reason why people went into the office. And then we moved into the era of personal computer and local area networking, which, you know, still was pretty office-centric. And as I say, it's only really been, you know, the last 10 to 15 years or so with the internet really maturing, and distributed kind of computing coming about, that things have really allowed, you know, this work from anywhere, this distributed workforce approach, it can happen. These lines on this chart are very much oversimplified, right? If someone wants to challenge that these aren't quite right, I would completely agree. It's a general sort of view of, if you think about how productivity increased as we kind of went from, you know, farming and developing things in factories and offices, I think there's arguably then a dip when the office was no longer the best place to be. And in fact, open plan offices arguably are very distracting places for many people. You know, they're not the most comfortable places to be to get work done. And so they're a great place to catch up with people. But for me, I can't do productive work. I can't do architecture really effectively in a busy open plan office. And so therefore, I would say the office isn't always the most productive place. It depends obviously on the role, but I would say in general, you know, and again, I refer back to some of Dave Copland's pieces on this, where, you know, he talks about people being nervous, feeling like they're on the savannah. He compares people in the open plan office to, you know, animals on the savannah. It's a fantastic kind of narrative, and I'm probably doing a bad job of summarizing it, so I recommend you go and check that out. But it's really interesting, the kind of whole human kind of psychology piece around the open plan office and what that's done to people's kind of productivity and well-being. And then the agility is the other thing to kind of think about is, you know, as hunter-gatherers, we were incredibly agile. We could do what we wanted. We could react very fast to perhaps the change in where food was. You know, as we moved into sort of farming, we started to become shackled to locations. You know, we started to have routes. We started to become less agile, and factories even more so, because factories took time to retool, to create something else in a factory required quite a lot of work to retool the factory. And the same with offices. You know, if you want to reconfigure an office, that's quite a lot of work. And then if you think about the future with distributed workforce, there's the potential for far more agility, because smaller teams can perhaps go and work where it makes sense for them to go and work, go and use managed service offices, collaboration spaces. And the other thing I wanted to highlight at the end here is the fact that perhaps we'll see a return to tribes and communities, with the fact that people are now perhaps being more local, you know, not traveling into cities as much, perhaps having more of a community feel. Will there be more of a return to that kind of community ethos? I guess it remains to be seen. But these are some of the trends and some of the kind of technologies that, you know, we've kind of seen over, you know, the last tens of thousands of years, going back from, you know, farming and to where we are today. And perhaps it's an overreaction to the current sort of situation to say this is a massive shift, but I think certainly it's the start of a change in how we work, I would say, particularly for knowledge workers. And so, yeah, a couple of other points on here I've skipped over, of course, is the move to sort of smartphones, tablets and laptops, you know, ultra portable computing. The rise of open source as well has really shown how people can work online in a distributed manner, you know, across the internet, how they can collaborate using, you know, those sorts of collaboration tools. It's really kind of opened people's eyes to how you can work at scale in a distributed manner. And so kind of the last icon is almost kind of a bit of a bit jokey, really, in the fact that we have, you know, this concept of will we start to augment ourselves with technology? You know, clearly things like Google Glass have disappeared for now because society rejected it quite harshly. But I think, you know, it's only a matter of time before we start to see more, perhaps more augmented capabilities. Now, whether that's like this Android picture on the slide, probably not. It's probably going to be more like when you're working, the computer anticipates what you need given the task that you're operating on, and things like machine learning and so on, rather than, you know, perhaps it's all walking around like androids. But who knows where the future holds? And there's some really interesting, you know, discussions and, you know, cross between science fiction but also scientific papers talking about, you know, human augmentation and perhaps where will things lead in the future. And so coming on to the next kind of phase really is, you know, where are we now? You know, we're currently in this kind of interesting crossroads, I think, where we have a number of disruptive trends. We've got, you know, industry disruption and business change happening as a result of people really finally kind of understanding, I think in many cases, what the internet allows them to do, what the digital business really allows them to do. And so the other thing I would say is this decentralized computing is complemented by decentralized organizations, so DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations. A relatively new thing, but I think it shows the potential of a truly distributed virtual organization. I mean, there are many virtual organizations now with, you know, limited physical offices. And so it's going to be interesting to see how, you know, organizations change and pivot to this world of the distributed workforce. And I think you can create some interesting parallels between decentralized computing technologies and decentralized kind of operating structures and working structures. And so there's going to be some interesting changes, I think, on the horizon. where people start to really realize what the art of the possible is with their organization with this technology. Of course, the other thing that's really making waves is the intelligent edge. I think it's, as a computer scientist, it's been quite fascinating to see the centralization versus decentralization, where of course everyone compares the cloud, adopting the cloud, to mainframe era, where the mainframe was where all the computing power was, and now the cloud is where all the computing power is. But moving forward into the future, the cloud isn't going to be the right place for everything. And if you look at autonomous vehicles and you look at cybersecurity and various other things, actually you need the data and processing to be at the edge rather than in the cloud in many cases. The other thing is, with the 5G and better Wi-Fi and other connectivity, ultra fast, ubiquitous, reliable connectivity is no longer a dream. It's actually becoming a reality, which will unlock a whole bunch of new industrial Internet of Things and operational technology type use cases, perhaps interactive and dynamic retail, which might lure people back into retail spaces from online. And things such as enchanted environments and adaptive workspaces that can perhaps move around or reorganize depending on the needs of the day. So I think the offices of the future will certainly be more dynamic, not just in terms of how people use them, but I think in terms of how they're perhaps reconfigured. So today you have a touchscreen perhaps to book in, book out a meeting room. Perhaps in the future the touchscreen will allow you to rearrange that room, perhaps subdivide it, or create collaboration spaces, or whatever it is, perhaps do a workshop layout by clicking a button, and the adaptive environment might then adjust the surroundings for you. And of course, another big one, and this isn't an exhaustive list by any means, this was just a few examples, is automation and machine learning. And this ties in with some of the big complex challenges I'm going to come on to in a minute. Of course, automation and machine learning and artificial intelligence bring fantastic increases in productivity. They can do some things amazingly well. There are clearly a lot of gaps in what they can't do. They're not the answer to everything, but they are clearly, again, also making people realize what's possible with advanced statistical models and clever programming. And I think this is the one leg of these structural challenges that as architects we really need to face into. The other side is, of course, these big complex global problems, and many of these I think we have for too long been kind of kicking that can down the road of how do we deal with these things. And I think as architects it's time to start kind of looking at these things. Even if we can't solve them, we can at least start to make business leaders that we work with and our stakeholders aware of the trade-offs. As architects, I think we're great at showing options, doing an options analysis, coming up with different approaches, different solutions, different ways of solving problems. And I think it's time we started using some of that thinking on some of these big global challenges as well around, I think this is everything from climate change and sustainability. There's some really quite eye-opening stats about how much the IT industry, contributes in terms of, energy usage and emissions. And it's something like, if it was a country, it would be like the third biggest country in the world in terms of energy consumption. So it's time we started taking this seriously, really, and started thinking about not just the quickest, fastest way to get things done, but also factoring in the other consequences of our solutions and of our architectures. The other thing about some of the technologies I talked about on the left is it's potentially going to drive further inequality, unfortunately. The digital divide is only going to get worse before it gets better, as not everyone perhaps has access to connectivity. Not everyone understands how to do automation, how to build machine learning models. Yet many roles and many jobs will perhaps be reduced or replaced by these technologies. And so the ethical kind of considerations, in some of these machine learning models, perhaps whether someone can have a product or not, perhaps whether someone gets cheap insurance or more expensive insurance, or whether someone has a job moving forwards, is a key concern that needs to be factored in with many of our architectures. And this ties in with unemployment as well. Not only unemployment due to financial downturn, but many organizations are going to be looking at technology to make their recovery. And how do we ensure that we continue to ensure people are able to get a job, that we retrain those people. Some of these things are clearly more for the government side of things as well, but we all need to kind of think about the implications, I think, of some of our architectural choices. And of course, last but not least, and again, these aren't exhaustive, there are many sustainable development goals that need to be considered, but another big one is cyber and physical security. As things become more uncertain, and as cybercrime continues to be a problem, I should say, for many organizations, how do we also bake that thinking in these big structural problems are challenging. And I think as architects, we shouldn't think we have to solve all these things on our own. And hence, what we've done over the past couple of years is create this community, Architect Tomorrow. With the pandemic, we have switched it more into a virtual group, but the premise is still the same. How do we bring smart people together? How do we bring bright minds across the architecture profession together to discuss and solve some of these things collectively? Because I'm really excited by when you bring diverse opinions and diverse experiences together, you really get some fantastic ideas and problem solving coming out of that. And the other thing I would say is that the world is changing rapidly, as I've just sort of touched on. The pace of change isn't slowing down. Another great person that I like, who puts this really nicely, is a chap called Eddie Obeng, who says that we're living in the world after midnight. And by that he means that midnight was the last time when we could perhaps keep on top of everything that's going on around us. Back when we were farmers and hunter-gatherers and life was far simpler, we could kind of keep on top of what was going on around us. Now the world is so global, so complex, so technologically advanced, and there is so much happening across the world. It's just not possible for us all to keep on top of it individually. We've got to work collectively. We've got to pool our collective kind of experiences and knowledge together. I learn so much from my peers, and I think genuinely there are exciting kind of light bulb moments every time we kind of get together. And so that's kind of some of the rationale behind Architect Tomorrow. Let me move on. Here's a kind of quote I came up with a few weeks ago, which essentially says, for knowledge workers, that the cloud has shown that technology doesn't need to be in the office. And as tragic as this pandemic has been, I'm not going to trivialize it in any means at all. The situation has made knowledge workers and their managers realize they don't necessarily need to be in the office either. And I appreciate this applies more to knowledge workers, not every role that this applies to, but it has made people, as I say, really rethink and think about how they operate. And I come back to this distributed tech point, really. If you think about large organizations perhaps have been struggling to be dynamic enough, to be agile enough. And if you think about distributed technology being a way of scaling up and scaling down, being more agile, being more elastic, using cloud computing to respond to demands, to peaks in demand, I see distributed working as being offering a similar opportunity for how we work. And if we're more dynamic and more agile in how we work and where we work from and how we operate, then I think larger organizations can start to become more more reactive through things like self-organization, through various other moves to move processes to more lean, agile, dynamic sort of approaches, rather than long kind of complex processes. Of course, I'm massively simplifying here, but I think there's definitely something in that. As I touched on earlier, the situation has created gaps and will continue to create gaps. And I think it's worth talking about some of the other pieces here as well, that as people have rapidly moved to distributed workforce, to people working from home, the castle and moat model that perhaps many organizations were still relying on, and by that I mean the office is the castle, you have strong fortress walls around it, you have a moat, which is your firewall and your various kind of physical security, perhaps swipe badge entry and all those things. That model of protecting your organization has kind of come down overnight, really, with distributed working and working from home. And so that's created a bunch of gaps. People have had to move very quickly in order to react to how to work from home. And of course, there's had to be trade-offs. And I think the thing is here, the foundation to being a digital business, in my mind, is knowing what you have, both in terms of your people, but also in terms of your technology assets, and what are their risks and weaknesses. And so that's very much what Tanium is all about. And I'll talk a little bit more about how we help our customers with that. But essentially, this all boils down really to having the right collaboration in place, the right data in place, and sort of trusted platforms really to kind of work from. Too long, I think we've worked in silos in technology, because perhaps we don't like people, we like technology, but we don't always like people. I'm massively generalizing, but I also perhaps talking a little bit about myself at times. But I go back to this kind of phrase that is a bit of a cliche, but it's true. You can't manage what you can't measure. And this applies to technology as much as it applies to anything else. If you don't know what you've got, you don't know where it is, then you're in trouble. And you can't secure what you can't see. So you can't really be secure if you don't actually know what you've got. And unfortunately, many organizations just don't actually know what they have because they don't have effective processes for knowing. IT is often the cobbler with broken shoes. It's kind of a bit of an irony, really, that the IT department doesn't have good technology to manage its own technology in many cases because it's just not been a priority. But I think this shift to distributed working has made many organizations realize, no, we need to make sure we're on top of what technology is where and what risks it has and what things we need to do in order to kind of improve the situation. And in fact, on this topic, we're running a virtual relay as part of Architect Tomorrow on the 22nd of September. So look out for that and feel free to get in touch with me if that's of interest. I'll talk a bit more about what a virtual relay is in a second. So a little bit more about Tanium, who we are. So as I said, we're a unified endpoint management and a unified endpoint security platform. And we really truly believe in this unification, as you can see from our approach. We really want to offer a holistic approach to securing and managing technology. And I believe that's the foundation to any digital business, as I say, is to really have a good, stable platform for execution, which is a secure platform for execution, and one where you know what you have. And so UEM, just quickly, allows you to kind of essentially inventory what assets you have, but do that in real time, not rely on an old outdated database, do it dynamically using a really clever protocol and really clever distributed technology approach. And it lets you manage what software you have, manage patching, manage performance, and so on and so forth. And then on the security side, how do you respond very quickly, perhaps when you have a malware or a breach or some data issue? How do you then very quickly find out what machines that affects and go and fix that and go and remediate issues at scale? So I'm talking here about perhaps organizations with tens, if not hundreds of thousands, and in fact, we have customers with millions of endpoints under management with Tanium. So how do you do that at scale is often the challenge. How do you do that at scale? And then when you don't actually know where your computing is, you don't know if folks have taken their laptop home or it's still in the office or it's in a coffee shop, how do you manage that problem? And many solutions just don't work. And so we've fundamentally re-architected how you do systems management in order to solve those problems. And then this is a reference architecture, so I'm not going to dwell on this. This is something that I'll be publishing from time to time on Architect Tomorrow, but it's not just about Tanium, but clearly cybersecurity and IT operations is a key theme, as I say, is a foundational theme. And so this is where we see sort of our thing fitting alongside other platforms and different types of endpoint. But as I say, I won't dwell on this because this talk isn't really about Tanium, but I wanted to give you a little bit of background on who Tanium are and why architecture is so important to Tanium, because clearly to get this right, when we work well with our customers, they need to sort of understand that we're a platform and we talk to other platforms, and we really align nicely with architecture principles such as kind of consolidation and keeping things simple. And so Architect Tomorrow. So I would love folks to get involved with Architect Tomorrow. And as I say, I'm really excited that IASA and Architect Tomorrow are working more and more together, which is brilliant. And so Architect Tomorrow is that community that I touched on that brings together different types of architects across the enterprise, business, technology spectrum, bring those people together, allows an opportunity to share that breadth of knowledge and solve collective challenges. But it's also a platform for architects. There's a way to perhaps grow your own network, amplify your impact on organizations. Ironically, I found often some of the best ways to have an impact internally is actually to be quite active externally with thinking. And we have a number of things that we do. So we have something we call the Architect, where we do an interview with a prominent architect and the chief architects and CTOs and so on. We do short video interviews with those. We have something called unboxing, where we'll unbox an architecture. We're going to unbox the Tanium architecture shortly, but we'll also unbox perhaps things like AWS and Google Cloud and various other platforms. We'll unbox those. It's a bit of a joke, a bit of a parody on the unboxing YouTube video. So it's a bit of fun as well as an opportunity to learn something new about an architecture. So more on our technical track. Community talks, I love these because people come to me and say, Oliver, can we do a discussion on smart cities and Internet of Things and operational technology and 5G? And that's exactly what we did a couple of weeks ago. We ran one on that very topic. We've done them on the response to the pandemic, how you should be helping your organizations think medium to longer term in these times when everyone is obviously knee-jerk reacting to everything. How do you help your organizations think about the pivots they need to make to being more of a digital business? So we've done some great talks there. All that content, by the way, is on our YouTube channel. And then virtual relays is something I'm really excited about, because we've really experimented here with how you do workshops and brainstorming and mind mapping and so on online. So we've taken a format that works quite well in person, but we've actually made it work online by having essentially a shared mind map and we break a group into smaller groups, and they rotate around different topics, and they build on a mind map. And in fact, on the next slide, I've got an example of some of the output of that. In the middle here is this, these online workshops we do, where essentially we start with a theme, and then people will shout out or put in the chat different things, and we will start to connect up ideas and start to really brainstorm and connect and think about how we can approach something in a different way. And then actually the screenshots on the left are some of those videos I was talking about, some of those community talks we've done. And then the right hand side is the LinkedIn group, where we post some of our thinking about architecture, say in a very vendor agnostic way, thinking about the industry at large. And so yeah, Architect Tomorrow. So now I've got another short little video, which just talks about the fact that to join the community, we're on LinkedIn and we're on YouTube. So where do you find us? You definitely find us on YouTube. The channel is called Architect Tomorrow. We've got a number of blogs, and I'll be doing more on various different topics. We've got lots of great content coming up, interviews with prominent architects, like I say, chief architects at places like Capgemini and large kind of brand names, as well as small organizations as well. Independent consultants, many independent consultants are involved in the group as well, and that's been great. It's great to kind of work with a real diverse range of folks from large organizations and as well as startups and smaller organizations. We're active on LinkedIn. We're using the hashtag Architect Tomorrow, but we've also got a LinkedIn group as well. And so that's kind of largely what I was going to talk about, but I'm conscious I've kind of run ahead of time, but perhaps we've got a few questions. Michael, how are we doing on the questions front? Have we got questions?